Hey, let's talk about the best way for you to practice boundaries based on your specific birth chart. Because there's so many different ways to practice boundaries, but the way that's going to be the most effective, successful, and sustainable for you is going to be based on your chart, what you're most receptive to, and what you're able to most hold space for, what you have the most energy for. And so there's about 5 or 6 ways that you can go about looking at this. The first thing that I recommend is to take a look at where your Neptune and Pisces are in your chart. Now, this is because Neptune is the modern ruler of Pisces, so both Pisces and Neptune rule the dissolution of things in general. So this is where boundaries get dissolved. It doesn't have to just be boundaries, but in this particular video, we're going to be talking about the focus about how Pisces and Neptune dissolves boundaries. And this is why a lot of Pisces are often associated with being pushovers or people pleasers and stuff. And that's really a misuse of the energy. But the reason being is that Pisces is designed to dissolve boundaries, which can be really good in a lot of different ways. Like, Saturn is very much about creating structure and stability, and that's really good. But like, if sometimes having a wall isn't good. Sometimes the dissolving of the energy is beneficial, and it's about learning how to use your chart wisely. But by identifying where Neptune is in your chart, you're going to be able to realize, like, okay, this is an area where, unless you have other indicators in your chart, of course, this is a general analysis, it's going to tell you what house it's in, will tell you the area of your life that you're going to have a harder time creating boundaries. And so this tells you this is the area for you to work on, and identifying that is really important. Now, the beauty with astrology is the energies and the qualities that create the problems are also the same energy that you're going to use to correct the problem, which is great because then you don't have to do this new thing. You're just kind of shifting the energy in the space that it's already in. And it's a great way to work with yourself rather than against yourself. So you want to take a look at where Neptune is specifically in your chart. So that way you have a knowledge and awareness. This is an area where you want to work just a little bit hard, just be more mindful of. And then you also want to take a look at where Saturn is in your chart, because Saturn is where you create boundaries. So Saturn can be a really beneficial planet that can help you to sort of offset and balance that energy out. The other thing is that you want to take a look at the opposite sign, the opposite energy of Pisces. Because Pisces is about dissolving energy, the opposite sign, which is Virgo, is very much about creating boundaries. And Virgo is ruled by Mercury. So this is why Mercury can also be really beneficial as well. The thing with Pisces is that it can create kind of like confusions, delusions, it creates boundaries, and it's a little bit like more esoteric and ambivalent. So it can, whereas boundary is more explicit and structured and solid and material and tangible, Virgo and Mercury offers those things. It's earthy energy. So that's where it can be really beneficial to work with these energies in harmony to support you. And I will also get into talking about how Chiron, the modern ruler of Virgo, does play a role as well, because Virgo's modern ruler is Chiron, which represents unhealed wounds. So if you have a specific challenge with boundaries, there can be something to be looked at with your Chiron placement as well. But before we get into that, I want to first talk about what it means to have Neptune in each house, some of the challenges that you might experience. So, for example, if you have Neptune in your first house, this can mean that the challenges that you have are going to be within you. This can be where people come to you specifically, as far as like, it could be about you, about your physical body, how people approach you where they lack boundaries. This is also, the first house is about how you navigate your life, how you initiate yourself. So there are things that maybe you participate, which is true in, any house, but with special attention in the first and sixth house, which I'll get into more in detail when I get to the sixth house. This is an area where you do have to be a little bit more careful with how you're contributing to the energy that can kind of exacerbate it. Neptune is also where you're most sensitized as well. So this could also mean that you particularly don't practice boundaries within yourself. Your body is really sensitive. And another thing I do want to mention is that I've been trained as a medical astrologer, and in my personal observation in medical astrology, one of the things that I've noticed is that people who struggle with boundaries, not everyone, are likely to get some like rashes, eczema, some sort of like an affliction on the skin. And this is because the skin is a barrier, it's a boundary. And so if you're not practicing boundaries, then it shows up in your physical body as an indicator. So if you are definitely someone who I self-identify as having boundary issues and you have some skin challenges, that sort of tells you a story too, and is a reminder to really work on yourself. And this can be especially useful for some people who may not realize that you honestly struggle with boundaries. Some people just, honestly, I'm a Pisces, but I have different indicators in my chart. And so boundaries isn't something that I really struggle with. I have indicators that I've worked through this in multiple lifetimes. And so for the most part, I've been pretty good about it. And so on the occasion that I haven't been practicing boundaries because I don't know to look for areas, like I'm not hyper vigilant about, oh, like I need to practice boundaries, I need to practice boundaries. That's not something I think about. I feel like boundaries is a vocabulary that was created for people who don't have it. And when I wasn't taking care of myself, I realized that it showed up through my skin. And this is going to be really helpful because Pisces rules confusion and ambivalence. Sometimes you may not be aware of it and you may think like, oh, I'm really practicing boundaries. And you may be, but maybe you're not doing it effectively enough. So definitely check in with your body, or, things that are related to boundaries, how those things are showing up. Are there like challenges in those areas? Now, if you have Neptune in your second house, this can mean that you don't have boundaries when it comes to your finances, your resources, food. In ancient astrology, family was correlated with the second house. In modern astrology, it's the fourth house. So this can be, because the second house relates to things that support you and your physical body and your dietary habits, your resources. And so I would also say looking at your second house is really beneficial if you're struggling with boundaries, because the first house is you as a person. So if you are struggling with boundaries, look at your placement in your second house. What sign do you have there? Do you have any planets there? What planet or planets rule that sign? You can use sort of that energy to create a sense of barrier and boundary to protect yourself, because there are resources. And if you're not using it properly, you might be experiencing the challenging manifestations of it, but there are ways to redirect that. But overall, I would say, like, kind of examine, like, are you dissolving your finances? How are your boundaries with your family? Food. These are the things you want to look at if you have Neptune in your second house. And I should also mention that these are things that I'm referring to natally, which means where Neptune was at the exact time of your birth, but where Neptune is in your house right now also plays a role too. And then if you have Neptune in your third house, this might be where you have boundary issues in the way that you communicate. Maybe this is something where you have to work on how to communicate effectively so that you articulate and are clearer in addressing your boundaries. But maybe the way you communicate, it's not clear. There's a bit of a confusion. You have to work on it a little bit more. This can also be with neighbors, your day-to-day environment, and the people and things you interact with in those areas of your life. And this is why the third house is related to siblings, neighbors, coworkers, friends, even though there are other houses that relate to friends and siblings. This is related more to like your day-to-day interactions. It's your third house. Now, your third house is also about your early childhood experiences, your early education. So there can be some maybe early experiences that you've had where you felt vulnerable, you've experienced some sort of trauma there. And as a result, now you don't practice boundaries as a way to feel safe or as a way to feel less vulnerable. And so there could be something in your childhood to work through here. If you have Neptune in your fourth house, like I mentioned previously, this is related to your family in modern astrology. Now, different astrologers have a debate going on about whether the fourth house, because the fourth and 10th house are the axis of the parents. So while the fourth house is about family, it also is symbolic more of one parent more than the other, although it can be a combination of the two. And so some astrologers argue that the mother is home to the 4th house and the father is represented by the 10th house. And other astrologers say that it's flipped. Now, it really does depend on the branch of astrology, the modality that you're using. And in my personal experience looking at tons of charts, what I've noticed is it really does depend on the individual. I have a friend whose mom is so clearly demonstrated by the 10th house and the father by the 4th house, and for me, it's the opposite. Now, the reasoning is that because the 4th house is home to Cancer, which represents mother, this is why they say that the 4th house belongs to the mother, and the 10th house belonging to Capricorn, which is ruled by Saturn, and Saturn representing the father. The argument is the 10th house is about the father, and the 4th house is about the mother. And so in the traditional zodiac wheel, it basically says that regardless of the sign that you have in these houses, the signs have its home houses. So Cancer belongs to the 4th house. That's its original home. So regardless of what sign you have here, you're going to have the energy of Cancer in your 4th house. You're going to have the energy of Capricorn in your 10th house with all of the houses. Now, some astrologers argue the opposite and say that the 10th house represents the mother because the 10th house represents prominence, and the mother is oftentimes more significant and more prominent than the father. But that's also not true. There are definitely ways to look at your chart, look at the planets that represent which parents, to have a process of elimination to identify in each client's chart, each individual's chart, which one it is for every person. But for you can look at your chart and you can self-examine and identify, the 4th house is more symbolic of your mom or your dad, or basically any parental figure that was maternal or paternal. That's going to be the 4th house. But this is really to say that if you have Neptune in your 4th house, you can have boundary issues and challenges that come up related to family, the specific parent associated with this house, in your home environment. And so even though I forgot to mention that the 3rd house represents roommates, it could just be that you have struggles with boundaries in your home environment. And this can be when it comes to when people come over, your boundaries aren't very strong, or people living in your home, which can be inclusive of like your partner, your kids, pets, things of that nature. You can also, I think that's everything for the 4th house. And the 4th house is also related to your emotional roots and where you come from. So your boundary issues can also be related to things that you've learned from your family, including even your past lives. I don't know how relevant that is to mention right now, but I did want to mention it because your 4th house is about your origin roots, where you come from. And so that extends beyond just this incarnation. And so that's why it also includes past lives. Now, if you have Neptune in your 5th house, this is going to show up as struggling with having boundaries and or feeling vulnerable when it comes to romance, dating, flirting, sex, anything that you enjoy doing. You might be a little bit overly indulgent in, not be the most structured, not have the best boundaries, and this can even be something that you enjoy doing, like hanging out with your friends or something, it's something that you kind of have to develop some area of boundaries around. The 5th house is also about your children and your own business. So this can also be areas where you struggle with that. In your 6th house, this is your habits, your daily routines, your health, and your work environment. So habitually at work, you may lack boundaries. This can also be your coworkers, or if you're a boss, your employees are represented by the 6th house. Anyone that works for you, you may not have the strongest boundaries. In your habits, you may specifically related to your day-to-day habits in general, can be something where you're not practicing the best boundaries. This can also be a thing with, especially like with your health, and your health is influenced by your habits, but maybe you aren't healthy with your boundaries. These are areas where it can show up and kind of cause issues. Also with pets as well. In your 7th house, if you have Neptune here, this is often associated as the marriage house, which it can be, but it's about personal and professional partnerships. So this can be long-term partners, spouses, people that you have a professional collaboration with, whether it's coworkers, your clients, and stuff. But technically, because the 7th house is opposite of your 1st house, this is anyone or anything that isn't you. So when you have Neptune here, and I have my placement here, this means that this is where you can have, for me, where I lack boundaries is going to be other people. But what I've noticed, and the way it's shown up in my chart, is it's not so much that I lack boundaries with other people, but maybe other people lack boundaries with me. And the other thing, now this, fortunately for me, that doesn't happen too much. I experienced it more when I was younger, but I think that's partly because I have Capricorn here. Those of you who are the same generation as me, we have Neptune in Capricorn, and it rules old people. So as I got an older age, so as I got older, I kind of outgrew it. It wasn't something that I dealt with as much. And it also shows up as, for me, being strategic, because that's what Capricorn represents, gets dissolved. So it's not necessarily going to be that, like, because you have Neptune in a specific house, this is where you're going to struggle. It doesn't necessarily have to show up as dissolving boundaries. But if you're struggling with boundaries, this is how it can show up. But if you want to shift it, like if it's in I'm trying to think, because I wish I had more strategies. But there are certain things about Capricorn that, for example, can be problematic. Like, on the one hand, it's very structured, it's very success oriented, it represents wisdom and ancient stuff, but it can also be really antiquated and outdated. And so I tend to dissolve some of those antiquated, outdated hierarchies. So that's a way that if you are struggling with boundaries, you can redirect that energy based on the sign that it's in the house that it's in. And so I tend to dissolve the boundary. I tend to dissolve the energy of interacting with other people who tend to be really antiquated, operating out of like a hierarchical place, things that are problematic in that sort of a way. You also have to consider the planets that are also playing too. So I'm going to give my placement as an example, and also the way that it's shown up for me. So I also have Jupiter here. Now, Jupiter rules my 6th house, which is about work, and it's also about health issues, open enemies, problems, legal disputes, things of that nature. Basically, issues that have to be corrected. And so one thing that I noticed is early on as a coach, I had people reach out to me and they were like, hey, I'd love to do a collab with you. And I'm like, that sounds great. And then all of a sudden it would dissolve because of Neptune due to health issues. Jupiter is the ruler of my 6th house. And what I noticed is the people who reached out to me were really excited. And then all of a sudden they were like, I can't do this because I have a health issue. And it oftentimes is depression, which Capricorn rules depression. Neptune is in my Capricorn. And so that's a way that it can manifest. Fortunately, it's manifested, I don't know, I shouldn't say fortunately, but thankfully this wasn't an issue that I had with clients, which is another manifestation. This was more specifically with people that tried to do a business collaboration with me together. And the reason why I started realizing that this happened is that Capricorn is about success, public reputation, established, successful reputation, status, all of these things. And these were people who didn't have that yet. They weren't in their power. And a lot of them, I suspect or can confirm, didn't really have a very developed Pluto, which is the planet that represents power. And so they felt vulnerable, and so it triggered this health issue as a result, and the partnership kind of fell apart, whereas they were able to work with other people. And so through this experience and through learning astrology and through my teachers, I realized that it's really important for me to work with people who have that established successful reputation and that experience. Otherwise, it just kind of shows up in a lot of these problematic sort of ways. Whereas looking back, I look at like a lot of the clients that I had, and they've been very successful. They have a public reputation and status. So it also didn't show up with those same kind of challenges. So, just know that these things are going to show up in different ways. And let's see. So, yeah, that's just an example of how other planets can play a role in that, how you can redirect it. But this is really to say that if you have Neptune in your 7th house, be cautious of being maybe like struggling with difficulties with your spouse, business partners, anyone that's not you, and just be sort of like aware of these things. Now, if you have Neptune in your 8th house, this is very similar to having Pisces in your 8th house. My bestie has this placement, or she has Pisces in her 8th house. And Pisces is the most vulnerable sign. If you've been following my channel for a while, I started making videos at the start of Pisces season. So I made a lot of videos explaining this. The reason why Pisces is often associated with lacking in boundaries, being a victim, and being associated with being vulnerable is because it's represented by a fish. Fish can't speak. It doesn't have arms to protect itself. It doesn't have legs that can run away. And so there's a level of vulnerability there. And so when you have Neptune or Pisces in your 8th house, you can be extra sensitive and susceptible to trauma. You may be a little bit more sensitized there versus if you have Aries there. I know someone whose moon is in Aries, and she's like, she's strong. So whereas you're still strong, but you're just a little bit more sensitive, and that's okay. Just be aware of it. Give yourself sort of that grace and that understanding, that patience with yourself, and just be aware that you one of the things that you struggle with may be that even practicing boundaries can be very traumatizing for you. So this can be something that is really painful. It's something that I've noticed a lot of. And as a coach, I created a program called Empaths Are Badass Energy Bitches. And I'm going to be creating an adapted version of it for my astrology courses and stuff. But I do have an astrology reading specifically for people who struggle with boundaries called Empaths Are Badass Energy Bitches reading. And I created it specifically for people who struggle with it, but it was with Pisces, Neptune, strong 12th house in mind for people who need sort of that extra support and understanding, if you want to know exactly what is the best way for you to do this, this is a general reading, go ahead and check that service out because I do offer readings for that. But yeah, definitely I would say if you have Neptune or Pisces in your 8th house, that's a great reading for you to get. But just understand that you can have some hyper trauma around boundaries. Now, if you have Pisces in your 9th house, or I'm sorry, Neptune or Pisces, the same thing, or very similar, I should say. This is the placement that I have. And you know what? I'm sorry to jump around. I'm going to go. Another thing I want to mention is when I was talking about my Neptune placement, the other thing to consider is everything that I'm mentioning, it may not manifest this way, particularly if anything that I'm talking about, if it's exalted, like Neptune is in in Sagittarius, or it's comfortable, it's got positive aspects, it's well supported, then you're not necessarily going to have the same challenges. And this is why, for me, I've been fortunate enough to not deal with that too much. But believe me, I've had many, many lifetimes really developing this. And so having Neptune or Pisces in the 9th house here, this is a really beautiful placement because the 9th house is about spirituality, and Neptune is the most spiritual sign. Pisces is the most spiritual sign. So when you have this placement, it's really just a lovely placement. And so this can show that where you dissolve energy can be related to spirituality, which is great because it means that I have very easy access. I don't have a barrier to feeling the spiritual world. So I very rarely feel unsupported by the universe, because I tend to have like this awareness, this connection that I'm supported. But some of the problematic ways it might manifest might be that like the ninth house represents astrology teachers, spiritual teachers, such as astrologers, philosophers, and just other types of coaches, spiritual advisors. And this may be an area where you don't have the strongest boundaries. So this is an area where you might want to be careful and make sure that you don't just indiscriminately just take on what a person says. Like, you want to make sure to do your due diligence. Now, if you have Pisces or Neptune in your 10th house, where you might experience some vulnerability is either with your boss, or if you're a boss. This can be an area where you have some hard time with your boundaries. When it comes to your public reputation, you might be hypersensitized with what people tell you. And remember what I mentioned about the 4th house and the 10th house being the axis of the parents? So whichever parent is associated with the 10th house, this can also be an area where you might lack boundaries as well. Now, if you have Neptune in your 11th house, this can be an area where you lack boundaries when it comes to financial gains. Maybe when it comes to speaking up at your job to advocate for achieving financial gains. This can also be specific to friends in your local community, maybe on the internet. These are the things where you might kind of struggle with it a little bit more. Or if you're like, the 2nd house is about your finances and your 10th house is about your business. So it can be like your business's finances, you might lack boundaries there. There can be some confusion and vulnerability. If you have Neptune in your 12th house, this is an area of your life where you might subconsciously, unconsciously, and in hidden ways have like some hangups. Like, your psychological downfall can be that you lack boundaries, because that's what the 12th house represents. But the 12th house is also about letting things go. So this is an area where it's telling you being a pushover, struggling with boundaries, that's something that you are supposed to let go of. And so this is what I mean when I say that it's really important to recognize that where you have these challenges, the sign that you have here, this is also where you get to like use that same energy to reverse it. You don't have to do this whole new thing, put in all this new effort, things like that. It's really beneficial. I would say that, like I mentioned, you want to look at the opposite house to look at where Virgo is to see like, how can I create more balance? So what you want to do is whatever house that you have Neptune or Pisces in, look at the opposite house of that. The opposites of each house would be the 1st and the 7th, the 2nd and the 8th, the 3rd and the 9th, the 4th and the 10th, the 5th and the 11th, the 6th and the 12th. Okay, so the opposite is where you're going to have a Virgo, and the specific area of your life, find a way to communicate in a way that's more objective, where you have boundaries. Now, I'd love to talk about that more. I also want to talk about how you can use Saturn to support you as well. But for those of you guys who have been following me, the eclipse activated some really interesting stuff for me. And so I did just get back from urgent care. I have a slightly swollen appendix. So as someone who has really good boundaries, I'm not going to push myself. And so there's going to be a part 2 to this video, but I want you to start off with this video. And I would recommend just writing down where you know you're lacking boundaries. Actually, maybe not even do that, because that might just be really overwhelming and just be like a really long chore depending on how much you struggle with it. But look at where Neptune is in your chart. What house is it in? What sign is it in? And then I also recommend looking at the house and like the areas that I mentioned, the details, write that down. And write down, like, does it apply to those things? Kind of like match it together and be like, oh, my Neptune is in this house, and the area where I lack boundary is in this area. just be aware of it, and then write down the opposite house and the where Virgo is. Just start there for now. Okay, and then if you want to do a little bit more work, you can look at other things that represent that specific sign, that house, the planets, and you can incorporate those things. So for example, Neptune is about music, it's about art. You know, maybe you can use poetry or art as a way to express your boundaries. There's different ways to go about that. Like I said, there's going to be a part 2 video where I'll get more into it, and I'll also put I'll create some graphics and stuff that talk about those different things as well, so you can kind of piece together and kind of experiment some ways that you can work through it. Different people are going to be better at practicing boundaries based on like therapy. Some people it's going to be talking with friends. Sometimes it's just being in isolation. It really does depend. So I'll definitely get into it. And so again, we're going to be talking about Mercury, Saturn, and Chiron in these areas. But for now, the house and the sign that it's in, things associated with that, use those existing energies in order to practice boundaries. This is going to be a really great thing. And if you want to learn more about this and how it relates to your chart, please check out my services, and I'll be happy to do an Empaths Are Badass Energy Bitches reading for you. Thanks so much